Welcome to Pattern Portfolios, a tool for fast, consistent web development. My name is Carissa Demai. I work for the city of Philadelphia, and there's the peanut gallery. I'm a front-end web developer, and what I'd like to talk with you about today is what a pattern portfolio is, why you need one for any website that you're making, whether it be city-related or not, or government-related or not. And I'm actually going to provide you with a blank pattern portfolio that you can take home and actually start using after this project, at the end of this. So, just a little background. We are redesigning and re-implementing our website, the City of Philadelphia's website, and you can view that at alpha.phila.gov. We realize that it's hard work. And one thing that we have realized is that our pattern portfolio has made it a lot easier, not just to develop what will be the new phila.gov, maybe somewhat soon, but also other projects that are going to be new or upcoming. The great thing about a pattern portfolio is that it can apply to any project that you're working with, not just one site. So, what is a pattern portfolio? Let's define it before we figure out why we need one. It, at its core, is a collection of markup and styles that describes almost every design element in your site. But it also combines those elements together. So you're not just looking at the colors for the site. You're looking at how the colors for the site work together as a whole. And that's really the key piece of what a pattern portfolio does. It's not just the headline on the page, it's the headline and how it interacts and how it works with paragraphs and how paragraphs on the page work with lists, and it goes on and so forth. And we'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. So what is a pattern portfolio? Well, it's truly the most tangible and useful deliverable that you can get. And the reason for that is you can extrapolate pretty much any element that you need from it. A pattern portfolio is not just a home page and a content page. If you've ever redesigned a website, outsourced that product that you're looking for, you might find that what you receive from the company that you've outsourced your project to is exactly that, a home page and a content page. I used to work for a major university in the city of Philadelphia, and we redesigned our website while I was employed there. And what we got after spending a lot of money was a home page and a content page. And unfortunately, that made it really difficult to apply those styles and apply that markup to other areas of the site. And so a lot of time and money is wasted, and too much time and money is wasted on extrapolating and figuring out how to use some deliverables that really can't be modified elsewhere, really can't be used anywhere else. So you're spending a lot of time looking at markup that exists and reworking it, and looking at CSS that exists and reworking it to apply to your particular use case. Well, the pattern portfolio eliminates those problems, and it gives you almost immediately consistency between different areas of your site. So what you might have, so what you get is more time spent on developing, actual development, instead of trying to rework a mock-up that you got from this outside company. So, for example, you see a mock-up, right? You get it. And what the pattern portfolio does is really breaks down the elements of the site. So a headline, for example, or a paragraph. And then it looks at larger sections, perhaps breadcrumbs, and then to go even further, the search bar. And then all of those things combined is really, that's your header. And so the pattern portfolio allows you to grab those little specific elements, put them together, rip them apart, and reorganize them in ways that are useful for you. So a little bit about how alpha.phila.gov came about. We sort of started to tackle projects the way that we are used to doing that, and we would just kind of jump headfirst directly into the project. And my images apparently aren't there, jumping headfirst. It was a guy jumping into a water but he's not there, so ignore that. It just says jumping head first. That's the alt text, which you should definitely have on all of your images when they don't show up, like right now. And so we were destined to walk down the same path that we had with the current website, which is usable, it works for what it is, but we wanted to do something better. So a better approach to redesigning a site is choosing design principles, and I'm not going to go too much into how we decided to use those design principles, but there's an about page on our on alpha.phil.gov that describes the design principles that we're using. And so we decided that that was the right thing to do. We were going to decide on design principles that was going to guide our development process, and we did a lot of research, and we realized that probably what we really needed to do was create a pattern portfolio. And what that's going to give us, as you'll see in a few minutes, is consistency with external sites and applications. If you work for government, you know that there's a lot of other entities that might need to, create sites, and they all look totally different, and that's horrible because it's a different user experience for everyone that's trying to figure out how these things work. They look different, they're inconsistent, and we decided that the right thing to do was to create a pattern portfolio because it will bring in all those disparate elements, all those different vendors that we might use, or even in-house projects, and we could give them all a consistent look and feel. So, our first idea after we decided we did need a pattern portfolio, we did what we know best, and we sent out an RFP. And this might be something that you're quite used to if you work in government. What else do? You sign out, you create an RFP, and that was awesome because Philly's tech scene is absolutely amazing. I'm not sure if anyone here knows about the Philly tech scene, besides the 4 people that work on my team. But Philadelphia is fantastic, and we got some really, really wonderful responses to that RFP, and we were really excited. The problem was that they all cost a lot of money, and so that was kind of a problem because we didn't really have a budget for this project. And so we decided that really we do have the skills, let's do it in-house. And that was a great quote from my manager, Kyle Odom, who's sitting back there. Yes. Without getting too specific, it was in the 100,000s for certain ones, and it was lower than that for others. But it really depended on, which, the company itself and how many people would be working on it. So, it was a range. Yeah. So, we have the skills, let's do it in-house. And I think this is something that makes our project unique and really great, is that we are able to do this stuff ourselves. And if there's anything that you take away from this presentation, it's that your team can do it too. If you have web people that work on your website, you guys can do this. It's not hard, but it does it does require that you get approval from some certain people, and we are really lucky, and we have that in Philly. So we were able to do this project, and we, it's rare that it happens this way, but it really does. By being able to work on this project ourselves, it brings a commitment and a history to the project that wouldn't have been there if we had gone with an outside firm. So we are lucky, and I hope the rest of you can be lucky too. So the goals of our pattern portfolio is that it's easy to implement, and we'll talk about each of these more specifically in a second. That it's easy to update, because if it's not easy to update, then I would be crying, and nobody wants that. And that it would be robust. So anything that someone could imagine that we needed, it exists, it's there, and we can apply it to our sites. So easy to implement. This needs to be not just for us, but also for outside vendors. So if I am someone that wants to use the pattern portfolio in my project, all I need to do is add 2 lines of code to my project, and I have all of the styles that would be available to me with the pattern portfolio, which is This is kind of nice. It's easy. We do require jQuery because there's a little bit of JavaScript that we're using, and it's jQuery. But for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. That's really it. That's all you need. And then you have all of the styles that will make your site look like alpha.phila.gov. That's kind of cool. The second sort of mandate that we had for ourselves was that it be easy to update. And this is really sort of the most exciting part of, I think, all of this, is that our project is available on GitHub Pages. So the pattern portfolio lives on GitHub, and you are actually linking to a GitHub URL when you use the styles for the pattern portfolio. So if you look at both of those, it's cityoffphiladelphia.github.io. That's where this project lives. That's kind of cool. So we use Jekyll, which is a static site generator. And all we need to do is update a few places in the markup when we're ready to do that, save the files, and then it's auto-generated for us. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But the cool part is that, again, it's on GitHub Pages. It's using these free open source tools, and we're producing a free open source project. So that's exciting for us. And we make changes a lot. So that's another reason why it needs to be easy to update, is because we're still in development. We're still working on the alpha product. And without changes being easy to create, then would rip our hair out. So. And then finally, our pattern portfolio is built on Foundation 5. So that really gives us a lot of flexibility and a lot of opportunity to use what's already out there in the community. So, we had a few choices here. If we were going to use a front-end framework, we could have gone with Bootstrap, which is certainly popular enough. But we decided that Foundation was just a little bit more lightweight in terms of the technical footprint it was going to leave on our project. And so Foundation really just made a lot of sense. We also thought of going the opposite direction and using something like pure CSS, which is very, very simple. But then we wouldn't have gotten some of the more robust things that Foundation gives us, like carousels and tabs, things like that. So Foundation was sort of the right balance between, Bootstrap and something totally slimmed down. So that's why we chose Foundation to base our portfolio on. So I mentioned before we did a lot of research to determine the fact that we needed a pattern portfolio. And really what we're talking about there is these amazing articles and a tool called Pattern Lab, which I'll discuss in much more detail in a few minutes. But if you are at all interested in pattern portfolios, how to use them, how to create them yourselves, then these 3 items are links in my slide deck here, and you'll be able to really get a lot of knowledge from these guys. And we'll talk about Pattern Lab more extensively in a few minutes. So there are a number of other sites that are currently using our pattern portfolio. This is a short list, actually, surprisingly, but I have some screenshots so you can kind of see. This is the property search application, which lets you type in an address and finds a property in Philadelphia, so you get all kinds of really great information about the property, like how much the taxes are. Well, that's in development, but you get a lot of great information, like when your trash needs to be picked up or put onto the curb, like that's good stuff. We also have the pay a bill site, which is using the pattern portfolio. And these are completely different URLs. These are not on alpha.phila.gov right now. These are totally different entities, but they all have a consistent look and feel because they're using the pattern portfolio. And then this one is still in development. This is an application matrix. This is pretty cool. And as you can see, at the very least, the top bar, the header is there, so you know what site you're on at all times. There's certain design elements that are consistent across all these disparate applications. So that's pretty exciting. So in terms of how someone gets updates about the pattern portfolio when it's in use, we have our ship it squirrel, because if we're in agile development, we know that the thing that we want to do most is is ship, right? We're all constantly be shipping. So we have a release process for the pattern portfolio, and pretty much the releases on GitHub are change logs. So anytime there's a new release, we make a release on GitHub and we put in all the changes. Very easy to set up, easy to do on that end. And then if I was a developer and I realized that I had a new, that there was a new release of the pattern portfolio out, then all I would need to do is change the URL in my CSS file that I linked to in the head of my page, and I would have the latest and greatest version of the pattern portfolio, which right now is 0.11.1. We're still not on version 1 yet, but probably soon. Maybe, we'll see. We'll talk about how to create releases when I get more into the technical side of this discussion, which is coming soon, I promise. If you're more into the technical stuff, we'll get there. But the process for setting up releases is manual. So it's not like I can just push up a change to GitHub and then everyone's sites who are using this project get updated immediately. I think that would be bad. That would be really bad. If something broke, that would be likely that an element might change or a style might change and it could break other sites. So by having specific releases and having the onus on the developer to update their URLs, we're really saying, hey, make sure your project is up to date. Otherwise, you're not getting the best that your site could be. And another note on this, we also considered doing something like injections. So, we'd have a JavaScript file that you would point to, and then you would get the philly.gov header and the philly.gov footer, and then you would get automatic, markup and style updates to that. We decided that wasn't going to be the greatest approach, and we would prefer people to just have to sort of know that they needed to update the pattern portfolio. So to that end, we created a mailing list, so you'll get an email blast. Basically, if we're aware that you're using the portfolio, then I'll send you an email and let you know. And that's a mailing list that you can join. And you can also just watch the GitHub repo for changes. So that's how people get alerts right now as to whether or not things are new and up to date. So the caveats to this type of approach to what we're doing right now is that it is a manual process, as I just described. Developers do need to make sure that they update to the latest version if they want the latest version of the pattern portfolio. And during times of heavy development, updates can take slightly longer to get into what we're considering right now, production. So when I have a new pattern that needs to make it into the pattern portfolio, there's a bit of a process behind that. And that's because alpha is still currently in development and our pattern portfolio is also still currently in development. So it takes a while for those things to sort of make their way into our production site, which is alpha.philly.gov. But while that might be a slow process, or slower than it could be instantaneous, but it's not, that also makes us more aware of the changes that we're making. So, we're not just sort of being willy-nilly about, putting something on alpha.philly.gov until we're ready and really sure that, yes, that thing, A, should be a pattern in the pattern portfolio, and B, it's ready to go to production. So those are the caveats, but to give you a sense as to how sort of robust and cool the pattern portfolio really is, this presentation is using the pattern portfolio styles. So the links are the color of our pattern portfolio, and it's also using Reveal.js, which is a really cool slide presentation. As you can see, I have great transitions. It's very cool. So if you're interested in using a pattern portfolio and getting started on using a pattern portfolio, you can go to this URL. This is carissadimai.github.io/patternlab-jekyll. And again, this is a link in the slides, so if you check out the slides, you'll get this. And what you get is really everything that you need to start your own pattern portfolio. You can start using patterns on whatever site you're working on right now. And that's that's really the core of this presentation, is that you can take this home and start using it right now if you wanted to. So let's talk a little bit about, first of all, why it's called Pattern Lab Jekyll. So I mentioned Pattern Lab earlier in the presentation, and the truth is that we really took a lot of ideas from Pattern Lab. And let me just see if this will update here. Let me click this guy. Here we go. So patternlab.io is really cool. It's basically a PHP-based version of the pattern portfolio that I'm showing to you, that I'm giving you guys. But they really did all the hard stuff here. So they went through the trouble of, creating this vocabulary for how we should describe elements on the site. And as you can see, it starts with the smallest of the things, which is atoms. It goes into molecules, it's organisms, and then things start to sort of break down when we talk about templates and we talk about pages, but that's okay. It's still really cool. So as I mentioned, we took a lot of our sort of ideas from Pattern Lab. So when you look at the sort of Jekyll version of Pattern Lab, you're going to see that it's set up very similarly. And so I'm not going to talk too much about, and let me put this back to full screen because my background's crazy. There we go. I'm not going to talk about too much detail about atoms, molecules, and organisms, because that's all really well documented on the Pattern Lab website. But the idea is that, come on. Oh, I shouldn't have pressed anything. There we go. But the idea is that an atom is, if we go back to our ideas earlier about these things that we're pulling out of the mock-ups, we're really saying, well, what is at the core of these elements? Well, an atom, in this case, is the page title. It's an H1. It's something that's on every single page. And then we start to think about, well, what's a paragraph? And how does a heading and a paragraph work together? What kind of padding is between them? What line height are we looking at? How much kerning is between these letters? Things like that. And then we can get into sort of bigger pieces. Well, we know what a link looks like. Well, how do those links look when we start to put them together to form a breadcrumb? Those are molecules. Those are the next sort of organic level of these things. And we can take Another example is the search bar. A search bar is a form element with a button next to it. Well, how do those things work together? That's another molecule. And we can talk about an organism being a combination of these elements that we started very small, and now we're working our way to the bigger picture. So an organism is the header. So this is the logo and the search bar in conjunction with our breadcrumbs. So this really means, how do these things work together? And that's what the pattern portfolio really gives you, is the ability to see these things individually, and then how they work together to actually create your website. So when we step out of our sort of our biological, our biosphere, that's not the right word. When we step away from our analogy of biology, then we're really looking at, well, what is a template? And a template is all of these elements put back together again to form that mock-up. So when you look at, and let me just go back here. So when you look at the Jekyll version of this Pattern Lab that you can view on GitHub, you're really seeing atoms, molecules, and organisms, and those are Jekyll collections. So if you're not familiar with Jekyll, that might be an odd term to you, but essentially they're just ways to group things. So the same way that the Pattern Lab is grouping atoms together, we're grouping things in Jekyll the same way. So that's that. Let me just go forward a little bit here. So when we update patterns, we're looking for specific folders, and those folders are named those those vocabulary words that we just talked about: atoms, molecules, organisms. And if we sort of look down the tree of what's here, we're getting things like colors and fonts and animations, visibility, these really specific small pieces of our styles, and those come together to create what we're really talking about, is those HTML elements. So that's the sort of markup side, and then there is the style side. So we use Sass to write all of our styles, and the pattern portfolio is no different. So what we have is a folder for Sass and a bunch of sort of broken down, and I'm sorry if this is hard to see, I realize you probably can't read any of this. But basically we have individual files that describe the styles that we're creating for each of these options. So we have something for headings, so we have something for links. And all of those things get compiled together, compressed, and that's what your pattern portfolio is going to output, is a compressed CSS file with all of the styles for the site on it. So I don't want to talk too much about creating releases. This is in the GitHub repo, which I'm going to sort of walk you through in a few minutes. But when you're ready to create a release, there is a process to that. And so we have a variable in our config file that says, all right, this is the version that we're on. You need to update that to make sure that, if you've used it in any other places, that variable gets updated everywhere. You will create a release folder under the distribution section, which is how people are going to point to those files. And then you're going to just actually copy a CSS file into that distribution folder. And that's going to be it. That's how you're ready to create your pattern styles. And then create a release on GitHub, just so that you have that changelog and you have sort of the official GitHub, like, yes, this is a release. We're ready to use this software kind of thing. So to that effect, let me, I will pull up, if my computer cooperates. I have the spinning wheel of death, guys. This is really bad. There we go. So let me show you this awesomeness. So this is the Pattern Lab Jekyll site on GitHub. Again, also using GitHub Pages because it's super easy to use and fun. And so if you're familiar with Pattern Lab, this is going to look really familiar. And it's because we're basically taking a stripped down version of what Pattern Lab gives us, again, with that same vocabulary of atoms, molecules, and organisms. And we're really just listing out every element that's something that we could use on our site. So we have headings, we have paragraphs, block quotes, anything like that. And then what somebody who is developing can do is copy out that text, and they have the markup that they need, and if they're pointing at that CSS file, then they also have all the styles that they need. And that's how easy it is to sort of use the pattern portfolio. And if we check out some of the links up top here, we have the home page. And as you can see, these are just really simple, clean ways in which these elements can come together to sort of be a site. So that is the sort of unstyled, very simple Pattern Lab Jekyll version of the pattern portfolio. And then this is phila.gov patterns. This is what we're actually using on our site. So as you can see, it's a little bit different. It's laid out slightly different as well, but the core is the same, where there's some code that you can copy and paste out if you're using this in your project. There is page examples. So if I wanted to know what an alert page should look like, I have an example of that ready to go. Let's see. Wow, we're speeding right through this. The other sort of useful thing about the pattern portfolio is that you can create essentially a boilerplate. So if I really just want to start a project, I'm ready to go, I'm not really interested in reading through what all the elements are and figuring out how to get started, I can just copy and paste this boilerplate that we created, which is the header with the CSS files that you need, the footer with the JavaScript files that you need, and then I have a big old content area where I can just start my project and sort of get up and running really fast and easily. So really what we're getting here is the ability to see all of our different elements in a way that we would not necessarily be able to otherwise. If you just have a mock-up, it's always going to be static. It's always going to look like a mock-up. But once we have an area where we can start to piece things together almost in real time, then we're really getting to a place where development becomes a lot faster. Now, when somebody is ready to, create their own project and have it look like a phila.gov project, everything's kind of already done for them. I mean, not the hard part, of course, but they have all the elements that they need and they have the styles that they need to get up and running really fast and quickly. And so that's really the core of what a pattern portfolio does, is it gets you up and running really fast and quickly. So, yeah, that was way faster than I thought it was going to be. Does anyone have questions about how to do this? Yeah? No? Yeah.
So as far as naming conventions, do you run into issues where you create a particular pattern with one specific intent, and then that pattern gets reused in a way that has a completely different intent?
That's a really good question. Yes, that happens. And part of what we try and do is, name things in a way that is specific to the use of the element. So we're really trying to do things semantically, if at all possible. And, it's definitely, there are times when, you might have, I'm trying to think of a specific example. For example, we have an alternate class on buttons, and maybe you want to have an alternate class on something else. So, you have one version of it, it's blue, and you have another version of it, and it's white. How do you decide between naming the same thing, naming the same class alternate? So what I think we mostly try and do is be specific about the kind of use that the element is going to have. So if it's a button, then it should really be buttons dash, something. So and as much as possible, try and keep these things consistent across, their individual patterns, and then of course in the larger sort of view. And I think part of what makes the pattern portfolio so useful is that you can see those problems before it becomes one, right? So if you're developing on a huge site, you might create something and it makes sense for you in that one instance, and then you realize that it changed something on a page that you didn't even realize existed, because your site can just be that huge a lot of times. And when you see all of the elements laid out for you on one page, you're going to realize really quickly whether or not you have a name clash, or whether or not things just don't seem to be working together the way that you kind of expected them to. So that's one of the other benefits of doing something like this, where it's really obvious just because you have a list of everything that you're using. Oh no, that one snippet of JavaScript even doesn't necessarily work on this other piece. So. Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Did I answer it?
I think so. I mean, you are largely preaching to the choir, but...
Okay, that's good. Preaching to the choir, yeah, that's good. Hi. No, you're next.
Could you speak to usage standards? So, you have all of this, right? Your recommendations as to how to incorporate that. Because, like, for instance, you have colors there.
Mm-hmm.
There might be certain colors that you don't want to put together because they clash, or like, would you put all that information in a panel, or is that a separate doc?
That's also a really good question. I think there is a lot of overlap between, for something like a pattern portfolio and maybe a style guide. And something like a style guide would be the place that would describe more specifically, don't put blue next to yellow for these reasons. Don't change the logo to be smushed and pink, because that's not something we should do. I think for us, the pattern portfolio really is more about trying to see all the different ways in which these things can work together, without necessarily bumping into like clashes, because we kind of already thinking ahead as to like, okay, well, yeah, blue and gold don't go together in all cases. But it is possible for someone to sort of take what they see here and then, kind of mash things up. And I think we've probably already seen that, and we will continue to do so. So this is only like one step in the direction of really making sure that, if you're using these things, don't necessarily go crazy, and there's really no way to sort of stop people from doing that. That's the bottom line, is that people are going to do what they want. There's nothing around that. So, yeah. Yes.
Kind of a combination of these two questions. What about, do you feel like it's within the scope of the pattern portfolio or not to tell people like, yes, this is what a panel looks like, but don't use it for your main content body, or like an action button.
Yeah.
Or is that out of the scope of the pattern?
Well, I think that probably is something that does belong in the pattern portfolio. Like, don't use this for everything, or at least a description of like when this should be used. And we kind of have that. So we have, and maybe find something that's a little bit more useful here. So, I'm trying to think of a really good example. That's not a good one. No, there's that. So we have some areas in which, so like the page title. We have some elements where it's like, this is really how you should use this, like very specific. This should only be used in this case. And actually, I just thought of a really good one. So because our alpha site is currently in development, I probably scrolled past it at this point. Here we go, the alpha beta alert. So we have sort of a header on all of our pages that says the site's in development, and you should, here's how to provide feedback and some other information. But the description for this is really specific about how this element should be used. So I think we're still figuring out what that description is for every element. When should you use a button? When should you use a call to action? But I think the pattern portfolio there is a place for that information here, and we're still sort of trying to figure out what those limits are, and that's in part because we're still developing our alpha site, and this is sort of being created in conjunction with it. So we're developing sort of two things at once. And, so this still has plenty of growing up to do, as does, any web project. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Was there a particular piece of research that was helpful for convincing your peers or managers that it was important to do a step like this up front as opposed to just build and ship a website?
That's also a really good question, because both of my managers are in here. So we got really lucky, and we had a lot of autonomy with the project as a whole. So we didn't really necessarily need to like do a whole lot of, begging. But in terms of some of the research that we did, yes, there was a particular article that I would point you at, and that is this one here. So HBR, hopefully this works, did a very similar, they took a very similar approach to the redesign of their site, and they are basically using Pattern Lab as their pattern portfolio tool. And so we took a look at this presentation, and we saw a lot of similarities between what we were trying to do and what they were doing with the redesign of their website. And so I think this really informed us as to what direction really made sense for us to go. And so this is sort of how we started out, was using the sort of vanilla version of Pattern Lab. And we just thought that, there was just a little bit too much overhead with it. The sort of, it took a long time to regenerate the patterns. You were waiting almost, between 10 and 30 seconds for things to sort of refresh and for you to, get going. Whereas when we decided to sort of port the Pattern Lab over to Jekyll, it was a lot faster, it was a lot snappier. It takes about 3 seconds to regenerate the site and then display those patterns. So when you're really trying to, do rapid development, that's going to be, a lot nicer. So I would definitely check out this presentation though, because they have some really great insights, not just about pattern portfolios, but about the development process in general. So it's really useful. I saw another hand. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess what advantages does having a pattern lab provide for people that want to, prune or rapidly evaluate the different elements of your site in terms of like the design aspect?
Do you mean for like an existing site or?
Yeah, for an existing site.
For an existing site, I think it's probably definitely, that's an oxymoron. It's a lot more helpful to have something like this at the start of a project, but I think it can inform an existing one as well. So, even if you're if you have a project that already is done, it's ready to go, and it's live somewhere, you probably have pages that are completely different than other pages, and so trying to sort of reel in those sort of outliers can be done once you start to list out, well, maybe you shouldn't make the logo like this on all these different pages. Maybe there should be one header at least, or one footer, or at least some unifying elements across all those different, what I assume exists, different disparate things. So, yeah, I mean, part of what happened with the current Phila.gov is, there's always a request for something new. And, in trying to accommodate all of those requests, you end up building a ton of new things, and so you just have like a ton of new things, and there's sort of no thought put into, well, maybe that thing shouldn't exist at all. Maybe we should think about how those things connect and how they can be more unified and more connected. So having a pattern portfolio even at the end of a project might help you see those places where, oh, maybe I didn't need to do that thing twice, in some cases. So, yeah.
Actually, just a follow-up question on that. So when evaluating, let's say you have like a site that's already built and has all these elements in place, right, and they're kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
Would it make sense to evaluate the site like from that aspect, from like the design aspect beforehand, and then build kind of portfolio afterwards, after kind of like agreeing, or building it first and then the limit and like proving the site based off of what you already agreed on?
So let me just make sure I understand your question. Are you talking about pulling out the design elements first and then building the pattern portfolio, or are you talking about building the pattern portfolio and then? Yeah. So and like, which one? Okay. I would say at that. Just went dark. I would say in that scenario that you would probably want to pull out the design elements first, because that's really and the way that these things are structured is, what does a header look like? That's a design element. What does the breadcrumbs look like? That's an element itself. And if you can sort of see those things together, and even just think about the way that they exist and the way they interact with each other, then you have a much better chance of figuring out, what should even be in that pattern portfolio list. So, for example, you might find that you have, elements like an alert, but, that's something that this project has, and maybe your project doesn't necessarily need that thing. So what you really want to do is figure out what design elements are on your site and then see what should actually be considered a pattern, what is used across multiple pages, where do things actually sort of connect. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Anything else, guys? No? All right, that's cool. One more. Yes?
So I just want to say that this was one of, so I'm one of 11 managers that she's been and let me just say that this was one of the best decisions we've ever made. It's done so much for our code quality, and that we are doing atomic design so that things are in a place. And so when we need to change something, there is a place to go and change it. And when we need to build something new that needs to match what we're doing, a lot of these decisions are already made. That is what really makes this work so well. Is we're trying to speed development up, and we do that by eliminating decisions. And so the fewer decisions that developers have to make, that designers have to make, the faster we can go, the more consistent things can be, and we're all working towards things.
Yes, what he said. So what's next?
I wanted to add to that. City of San Diego, we're working on a redesign too, and we just completed we call it pattern libraries as a pattern portfolio. Same
idea.
Though. I was just thinking about your question about building a site and then pulling this stuff. What we actually did was, instead of building the site, it was just mock-ups and creating the pattern library for the mock-ups, because we're kind of thinking the same thing, right? Do we create a site first and then pull the components from there? We didn't want to go that far because we don't want to change things around as we're building and coding and all that. So it was really just mock-ups, just like the visual things.
Right.
And that really helped us out. From the visual mock-ups, we came up with the atoms and molecules. And then from there, we built a site. And I was like, wow, I'm so glad we did it that way, because so we can build a site from the molecules right there.
Right.
So that was the method we took.
Yeah. And that's what we did as well. I mean, it does make sense to start from a mock-up, because why would you spend time developing something that, it's going to go away, most likely, or change significantly. So, yeah. Cool. So what's next? Fork this project on GitHub. You can use this yourselves and fill it with your own patterns. There's probably a lot of things in there that you don't need, but that's the whole point, is that you sort of find it, make it your own, and do great things with it. And then you should tell us about it, because we love this stuff. So that's it. And we already did questions, because I went way faster than I thought I was. So thanks everyone for coming. I appreciate it.